Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am back with another review of another movie. Sunday, November 13th, 2022. We're talking about The Fabelmans, yo. This is the new Steven Spielberg film. It was put out on limited release on the same day as Black Panther Wakanda Forever. That was November 11th. Don't think that was a good idea from a box office standpoint. But it's supposed to be an awards contender. So I guess that's neither here nor there. But to talk about the movie, let me first back up a bit. Tell you about my experience at the theater. I go to the theater about 3 to 4 times weekly. And I frequent the same AMC theater and the same Alamo Draft House all the time. Today I chose to go to the AMC because it's right around the corner from the gym that I am a patron of. So right after my workout, I go to the theater. It's 4 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon in New York City, and it's getting colder. I go through the revolving doors, and I'm looking in the lobby, and it's pretty busy. There is a buzz in the movie theater. Now, obviously, I on Thursday night went to go watch a Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and for me, that is par for the course, right? Brand new movie, comic book movie, big Marvel thing. I expected it to be busy. And then I figured, okay, it's still opening weekend, so people are still going to be coming out and watching this movie in droves. So this is why there's so many people in the lobby. I go up the escalators, have the young lady scan my phone. I'm an AMC A-list member. She points me to auditorium number 3. I go to auditorium number 3. First thing I notice, it is 4 p.m. on the dot, and it's already dark in the movie theater. And I'm like, oh shit, they're really going to start the movie right now. I would have figured they would have gone through previews and things of that nature. They took a different approach in this specific auditorium. Usually when the previews are going, half the lights are still on in the theater. They acted like the movie was already started. The lights were completely off, and they were already running the trailers. Trailers ran for like a good 20 minutes or so, as they usually do. But when I took my seat, I noticed that the house was packed for the Fabelmans. That was surprising. I didn't necessarily think that this film had garnered that much interest, especially for, should I say, especially before wide release. So now, as I sit there and I'm watching all the previews, which I've already watched the majority of them before, I think the only new trailer that I saw was the trailer for The Whale, because I hadn't been privy to any previews or teasers to The Whale before, which is the new Brendan Fraser movie, which is getting a lot of Oscar talk. Anyways, in those particular theaters, at the theater that I go to, that have, I think all the theaters have wheelchair seating. I usually like to sit in the seat behind the person who usually has the wheelchair space, because it allows me leg room, and because I like to not necessarily spread my legs, but like I lounge, so I appreciate the leg space. I already had a lady and her family sitting to the right of me, and there's only 5 seats in that row. And this might sound a little standoffish or whatever the case is, but during the weekends and weekdays, especially in the afternoon, I don't usually have many people sitting next to me in that specific theater. So to me, I was like looking around the auditorium, looking next to me. I was like, wow, this is different. The movie-going experience seems to be on its way back. I tell you guys all this to preempt the movie review because it's part of what I'm trying to do with this podcast. Movies tell stories, and I want to be able to tell you guys the story or the event of how the movie took place, not necessarily how my day went, but my experience in the theater. So I hope that's a good visual for most people in this regard. So on to the movie, The Fabelmans, directed and co-written by Steven Spielberg. The film was a good film. It's been getting a lot of hype, and it's been one of those awards darlings type films. And for the life of me, after watching the film, I'll say this outright, it was a good film, like I said before. I don't get the hype. The reason as to why I say that is, I feel like Steven Spielberg in this film, not that he regressed, but he went back to the formula that he knows. This felt like one of his prime 1980s films. That's what it felt like. I understood that it was a timepiece as well. I believe Mr. Spielberg was born in the 50s. The film took place late 50s as a young kid, early 60s to mid 60s as a young teen to teenager, and then late 60s, early 70s where he was a young adult. But it still had that 1980s movie made feel. Some cheesiness to it. A lot of what the actor portrayals, even though none of them were bad, they were very cookie cutter. And I felt like outside of the mother's portrayal, there was no real depth to many of the characters in the movie, including the young man who was playing teen Spielberg in this case, or Sam Fabelman, should I say. Yet again, the comedic moments were good. I laughed out loud a few times. I don't take away from anyone's perception of humor, but there were a couple of lines there throughout the movie where I heard some really hearty laughs in the audience. And in my head, right, my opinion, in my point of view, I was like, yeah, that wasn't that funny. You shouldn't be laughing so hard. You know? But to each his own, right? Movies are subjective, so I guess that person found that's hilarious. So, yeah, that was cool. But to segue, like I said, I found the movie very cookie cutter. The acting was very man, I hate to say paint by numbers, but like it just seemed like your typical 1980s family film in 2022. I heard this particular critique of the movie earlier from a YouTube pundit, where she said that she didn't learn anything new about Steven Spielberg in this film. And for the most part, I don't know anything about Mr. Spielberg's life or anything like that. I wasn't aware he had any sisters, so that was news to me. I wasn't even aware that Steven Spielberg was originally from Jersey, so that was news to me too. So take that for what it was. Eventually, the family moved to Arizona and then California, and that's how he eventually got his start in Hollywood. It was cool to see what sparked his imagination as a kid, how he started filming and making movies with families and friends and schoolmates and things of that nature, and his Boy Scout troop. And not to say that the life that he lived wasn't real, but it's very, I guess what you call, or what you would paint as, Americana. And from his perspective, nothing bad with it. It's just that it's not much different than things that have been portrayed in other movies throughout the decades before. Outside of some of the individualistic Jewish characterizations that were implemented in the movie, obviously Mr. Spielberg having that Jewish background, everything else was of him going through the phases of life, the coming of age story of a young man during the mid 1900s, and you never mean to demean or discredit how somebody grew up, right? You see it in a certain way, and that's just what it is. And I couldn't necessarily relate to much of it, but I could objectively understand how this film is enjoyable. I just couldn't relate to it. Mind you, as a youth myself, I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood around Jewish kids, and I think this is why. No, well, let me correct myself. Not that I couldn't relate to it, right? Because like I was saying before, I grew up as a youngster. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood around Jewish kids and things of that nature. Understanding what their lifestyles were like and all that. But this was just so paint by the numbers type deal, and it didn't resonate with me. Not that I didn't relate to it, because I could relate to it, honestly. It just didn't resonate, because I've seen it so many other times before, and it didn't necessarily give me any insight as to, outside of what movies might have inspired him, what side of the family he might have gotten the imagination bug from. Nothing else necessarily landed with me. And I watched this film in the spirit of understanding my history with Spielberg films. A lot of the Spielberg films that I've watched in the past, they were very awe-inspiring and epic in scale. Some adventurous, some very serious, some very tied to the era that the movie was made in. This just didn't land. And I guess that's where I'm going to end this. Man, that sucks to say. But that's just my point of view, though. I know that there were a lot of people in the movie theater that enjoyed the movie. And they had a good time with it. There was a good, healthy buzz in the theater before the movie even started. So people were really excited about watching this film. My audience, from what I can see, when I entered the theater, when I exited the theater, it was majority Caucasian, majority older folks as well. Some younger folks here and there. I could probably count the people of color in that auditorium in one hand. But outside of that, that was my overall experience with the Fabelmans. Nothing wrong, nothing bad, just didn't land. And that's my take. It was fine. In the words of the great Maxwell Jacob Friedman, this movie was mid. I'll leave it at that. Thank you for taking the time out to listen. I appreciate y'all. I'll be back next week with some more movies for the fodder. Peace, folks. Have a good one.